Hello, my name is Maria Callahan. I'm 64 years old, and 2 days before my only son's wedding, he looked me in the eyes and told me that my death would be the best gift I could give him. I need you to understand something before I continue. I'm not telling you this story because I want sympathy. I'm not looking for validation or applause. I'm telling you this because for 37 years, I believed that being a good mother meant erasing myself completely, and I was wrong. But let me start at the beginning. Or rather, let me start at the end of what I thought my life was supposed to be. It was a Thursday evening in late September. Portland was beginning to show the first signs of autumn, that particular quality of light that turns everything golden just before the sun sets. The kind of evening that makes you believe good things are possible. I was in my kitchen. The same kitchen where I'd made breakfast for my son every school day for 12 years. The same kitchen where we'd celebrated birthdays with homemade cakes, where we'd sat across from each other after his father's funeral, and promised we'd be okay. I was preparing for David's wedding, my only child, the boy I'd raised alone after Thomas died in a head-on collision on I-84 when David was just 7 years old, the boy who used to climb into my lap when he was sad and ask me to read him the same story 3 times in a row, the boy who told me at age 9 that when he grew up he'd buy me a house by the ocean so I wouldn't have to work anymore. That Thursday, I was making apple cinnamon pie, David's favorite since childhood. I remember the warmth from the oven, the sweet smell filling the house, the way my hands, weathered from years of work, carefully crimped the edges of the crust. I was wearing the embroidered apron my mother had given me 40 years ago, faded but still intact. My wedding band, which I'd never removed even after Thomas died, caught the light as I worked. I heard his key in the lock, that distinct sound I'd know anywhere, the jingle of the keychain I'd given him when he turned 16. The one with a small silver compass and the inscription, "You'll always find your way home." Mom? His voice traveled through the hallway, but something was different. The warmth was gone. In its place was something I'd been noticing more and more over the past 3 years. A kind of impatient formality, as if he were addressing a distant relative rather than the woman who'd given him life. "I'm in the kitchen, sweetheart," I called back, wiping flour from my hands. He appeared in the doorway. David was 37, tall like his father, with the same dark hair and strong jawline. He wore an expensive charcoal suit, the kind I could never have afforded to buy him when he was growing up. He worked as a senior manager at Ashford Consulting, a tech company that had grown exponentially over the past decade. Behind him stood Jennifer, his fiancée. Jennifer was beautiful in that polished, untouchable way. Blonde hair perfectly straightened, designer clothes, a smile that never quite reached her pale blue eyes. She came from money, real money. Her parents owned a chain of upscale restaurants throughout the Pacific Northwest. She'd grown up with things I couldn't even imagine: private schools, summer homes, trips to Europe. "Hello, Mrs. Callahan," Jennifer said. Not Maria. Never Maria. Even though I'd asked her a dozen times to call me by my first name. "Jennifer, dear." "David, honey, I just pulled the pie from the oven. Would you like a slice?" He didn't answer. Instead, he exchanged a look with Jennifer. It was quick, but I caught it. The kind of wordless communication that happens between couples. She gave a small nod, and something in his posture shifted. "Mom, we need to talk." Those 4 words. I've learned that nothing good ever follows them. My heart began to beat faster. I'd been sensing something building for months. Missed Sunday dinners, unreturned phone calls, a growing distance I couldn't quite name but felt in my bones. "Of course, honey. Sit down." I gestured to the kitchen table, the same oak table where he'd done his homework, where we'd had countless meals, where I'd held his hands the night we buried his father. He remained standing. Jennifer positioned herself beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, a gesture that seemed supportive but felt like a claim. "This won't take long," he said. The words landed like stones. I found myself gripping the edge of the counter. "David, what's wrong?" He took a breath, the kind people take before delivering news they've rehearsed. "Jennifer and I have been talking, and we've decided that after the wedding, we need some space. From you." The room tilted slightly. "Space? I don't understand." "Mom, you're too involved. You call too much. You always want to know what we're doing, where we're going. You have opinions about everything." Jennifer finds it suffocating, and honestly, so do I. Each word was a small cut, but I kept my voice steady. "David, I only call because I care. Because I love you. I just want to be part of your life." "That's exactly the problem, Mom. You don't understand boundaries. You never have." Jennifer's hand tightened on his arm. She leaned in slightly, her voice soft and reasonable. "David, maybe you should be more direct." He looked at her, then back at me. And in that moment, I saw something I'd never seen before in my son's eyes. Contempt. "Mom, honestly, your death would be the best gift you could give me." Time stopped. The kitchen that had been warm moments ago suddenly felt cold. I heard the clock ticking on the wall, a wedding gift from my mother-in-law, still keeping time after all these years. I heard the refrigerator humming. I heard my own heartbeat, slow and heavy. David didn't look away. Jennifer didn't react. They stood there, united in their cruelty, waiting for my response. I wanted to scream. I wanted to collapse. I wanted to demand an explanation, to shake him, to remind him of every sacrifice I'd made. But instead, something inside me went very quiet, very still. "I see," I said. Just those two words, because what else was there to say? They left without another word. The door closed behind them with a soft click, and I stood alone in my kitchen, the smell of cinnamon and apples in the air, my son's favorite pie cooling on the counter, and the world I'd built brick by brick for 37 years crumbling around me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in Thomas's old armchair, the brown leather one I'd kept all these years because it still smelled faintly like him, and I let myself remember. David wasn't always like this. Or maybe he was, and I'd been too blinded by love to see it clearly. He was born on a rainy March morning. 7 pounds, 3 ounces. Perfect, Thomas cried when they placed him in his arms. We made a person, Maria. An actual person. We were so young. I was 27. Thomas was 29. We had a small apartment, not much money, but we had each other and we had this beautiful boy. Thomas was the electrician, good with his hands, patient, kind. He worked long hours, but always came home with a smile for David and me. We weren't rich, but we were happy. David's childhood was filled with simple joys, trips to the park, reading books together before bed, building blanket forts in the living room on rainy Sundays. Then, one Tuesday in October, a semi-truck driver fell asleep at the wheel on I-84. Thomas was driving home from a job site. The collision was instant. They told me he didn't suffer. I've never known if that was true or just something they say to make death easier for the living. David was 7, old enough to understand that his father was gone but too young to process the enormity of that loss. I watched my son retreat into himself. He stopped laughing, stopped playing, would wake up screaming in the middle of the night calling for his daddy. I was drowning in grief myself, but I couldn't afford to drown. I had a child to raise. Thomas had a small life insurance policy, enough to cover the funeral and give us a few months' cushion. After that, I was on my own. I took a job as a receptionist at Dr. Patterson's medical office. The pay was modest, but Dr. Patterson was kind, and the hours allowed me to be home when David got out of school. But it wasn't enough. Not for the mortgage, not for food, not for the future I wanted for my son. So I took a second job cleaning offices at night. I'd come home at 11, sometimes midnight, exhausted to my bones. David would be asleep, and I'd sit on the edge of his bed and watch him breathe, promising myself it would all be worth it. And for years it seemed like it was. David was a good student. Quiet, serious, determined. He made honor roll every semester. He played baseball, not because he was particularly talented, but because he worked harder than anyone else on the team. I went to every game I could, cheering from the bleachers in my worn-out scrubs because I'd come straight from work. When it came time for college, David got a partial scholarship to Portland State University. It covered half his tuition. I covered the rest. I sold my car and bought a cheaper one. I took out a personal loan. I picked up extra cleaning shifts. Dr. Patterson gave me a raise, bless him, when he found out I was working myself to exhaustion. "Maria," he told me one afternoon, "you're going to burn out. I'll rest when David graduates," I said. And I meant it, because that was my purpose. That was what gave my life meaning after Thomas died. David was going to have opportunities I never had. He was going to make something of himself. He was going to be happy. He graduated with honors, bachelor's in business administration. I was in the audience, crying, clutching the program, thinking about Thomas and wishing he could see the man our boy had become. David got an internship at Ashford Consulting. Within 2 years, he was hired full-time. Within 5 years, he was promoted to junior manager. Within 8, senior manager. He made more money in a year than I'd made in a decade. I was so proud, so grateful that the sacrifices had paid off. But somewhere along the way, things started to change. It began small. He'd cancel Sunday dinners at the last minute. "Something came up at work, Mom." His phone calls became shorter, more perfunctory. "Hey, Mom, I can't talk long, I'm busy." When I'd show up at his apartment with groceries or homemade meals, he'd seem annoyed rather than grateful. Then he met Jennifer. It was 3 years ago, at a company gala. She was working in marketing for one of Ashford's partner firms. She came from a completely different world. Country clubs, private schools, family money that went back generations. When David first introduced us, I tried so hard to make a good impression. I wore my best dress, brought flowers, smiled until my face hurt. Jennifer was polite, but cold. She looked at my dress, purchased from a department store clearance rack, with a kind of clinical assessment. She asked what I did for a living, and when I explained I was a medical receptionist, she said, "Oh, how nice," in a tone that clearly meant the opposite. After that dinner, David called me. "Mom, maybe go a little easier next time. You came on kind of strong." I hadn't thought I'd come on strong. I'd just been myself, but I apologized anyway. The invitations to see David became fewer. Jennifer was always busy, always had plans. When I did see them, Jennifer dominated the conversation, talking about places I'd never been and people I'd never heard of. David would laugh at her stories, touch her hand across the table, look at her like she'd hung the moon, and slowly, I felt myself becoming invisible. 6 months before the wedding, David called me. "Mom, I need to ask you something." My heart lifted. Maybe he wanted help planning something. Maybe he wanted my opinion. "Jennifer and I are running into some financial issues. The wedding's costing more than we expected. Could you help us out?" The question landed like a punch. "How much do you need?" $20,000 would cover it. $20,000. My entire emergency savings. The money I'd set aside in case I got sick, in case I lost my job, in case life threw me another curveball. "David, that's everything I have saved." "I know, Mom, and I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. But this is my wedding, your only son's wedding, and we'll pay you back. I promise." I wanted to say no. Some instinct in me screamed to protect myself, but the lifetime habit of putting David first was stronger. "Okay," I said. "I'll transfer it tomorrow." "Thanks, Mom. You're the best." They never paid me back. And 2 months later, David called again. "Mom, we're a little short on the honeymoon budget. Could you loan us $10,000? This time I hesitated. "David, I already gave you $20,000. I don't have much left." "I know, and I'm sorry. But we'll pay you back everything at once, I promise. We're just waiting on Jennifer's bonus from work." Against every rational thought, I said yes. I gave him the money. All of it. And with each transfer, I felt a piece of myself disappearing. But I told myself this was what mothers did. This was love. 3 weeks before the wedding, David called again. This time, he wanted help paying for the honeymoon to Italy. "You'd be contributing to a memory that'll last our whole lives, Mom." My bank account was nearly empty. My retirement fund was gone. I was 64 years old with almost nothing to show for a lifetime of work. But I said yes, because saying no felt like admitting I'd failed as a mother. And then came that Thursday evening. That apple pie. Those words. "Your death would be the best gift you could give me." Sitting in Thomas's chair that night, I finally understood what I'd refused to see for so long. I hadn't raised a son. I'd raised a man who saw me as an ATM with an inconvenient emotional attachment. And I'd allowed it. Every time I said yes when I should have said no. Every time I prioritized his comfort over my dignity. Every time I accepted crumbs of affection and called it love. The grief that washed over me wasn't just about David's words. It was about all the years I'd spent believing that sacrifice without reciprocity was noble, that giving until I had nothing left was what good mothers did. I'd been so wrong. And in that moment, sitting alone in the dark with the city lights twinkling through the window, something shifted inside me. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to try to change his mind. I was going to show him exactly what the loss of me actually meant. Friday morning arrived with rain. Heavy, persistent, the kind that makes the whole world feel gray. I woke up in Thomas's chair, my neck stiff, my body aching. But my mind was clearer than it had been in years. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and I made a list. It's funny how a lifetime can be reduced to a list of tasks, but that's what clarity does. It strips away emotion and leaves only action. Item 1, call Richard Brennan, my attorney. Item 2, go to the bank. Item 3, write the letter. Item 4, disappear. Richard Brennan had handled my affairs since Thomas died. He was a good man, honest, approaching 70 but still sharp. His office was downtown, in one of those old brick buildings that had survived urban renewal. When I called that morning, his secretary said he was booked solid. "It's urgent," I said, and something in my voice must have conveyed the weight of it, because she put me through. "Maria, what's wrong?" "I need to change my will. Today." There was a pause. "Today? Maria, these things usually require—" "Today, Richard. Please." He heard something in my tone. "Come in at 2 o'clock. I'll make time. I hung up and moved to item 2. First National Bank on Morrison Street. I'd been banking there for 30 years. The teller, a young woman named Ashley who always remembered my name, greeted me with a smile. "Mrs. Callahan, how can I help you today?" "I need to close my joint account and open a new one. Savings and checking. Only in my name." Her smile faltered slightly. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine. I just need to make some changes." The joint account had been set up 5 years ago, when David convinced me it would be easier for emergencies. "That way if something happens to you, I can help handle things, Mom." What he meant was, that way I can access your money whenever I want. The balance was $3,147, everything I had left after all the loans. I transferred it to a new account, a different bank entirely, Columbia River Bank, across town. Then I went to the credit card company and canceled the supplementary card I'd given David years ago. With each action, I felt lighter, as if I were shedding weight I hadn't known I was carrying. At 2 o'clock, I sat across from Richard in his wood-paneled office. He had my will pulled up on his computer, a document we'd last updated 5 years ago. Everything went to David: the house, what little savings I had, my life insurance policy, my mother's jewelry. "What changes do you want to make?" Richard asked gently. "I want to remove David as beneficiary. All of it." Richard set down his pen. "Maria, that's a significant decision. Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." May I ask what happened?" I told him. "Not everything, but enough." Richard listened without interruption, his expression growing more troubled. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, and he said, "I'm sorry, Maria. Truly." "Don't be sorry. Just help me fix this." We spent the next hour revising the will. My house would go to my sister Helen. My life insurance would be split between her and a charity I'd always supported. My mother's jewelry, pieces David had never shown any interest in, would go to Helen's daughter. David would receive nothing. "There's something else," I said. "I want to write him out of my medical directives too. If something happens to me, I don't want him making decisions. I want Helen." Richard nodded slowly. "I'll draft everything. You can sign next week." "I'll sign today." "Maria, today, Richard. I need this done today." He saw that I meant it. We worked through the documents. I signed each one, my hand steady, my heart certain. When I left his office, the rain had stopped. The city looked washed clean. I drove home and sat down at my kitchen table, pulled out a piece of stationery, the good kind, cream-colored with a subtle floral border, that I kept for special occasions, and I began to write. The letter came easily. No dramatic declarations, no angry accusations, just truth, simple and clear. "David, I've spent 37 years being your mother. I was there for every scraped knee, every bad dream, every disappointment and triumph. I worked 2 jobs to give you opportunities I never had. I gave you everything I could, and more than I should have. But somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as your mother and started seeing me as an obligation, or worse, as a resource to be used and discarded. 2 days ago, you told me my death would be the best gift I could give you, so I'm giving you the second best option, my absence. Effective immediately, all financial support has ended. The joint account is closed. Your supplementary credit card is canceled. My will has been changed. You will not inherit my house, my savings, or anything else. I hope you and Jennifer have a beautiful wedding. I hope you build a wonderful life together, but you'll do it without me. Don't try to contact me. Maria." I read it 3 times, changed nothing, folded it carefully and placed it in a white envelope, wrote his name on the front in my careful handwriting. Then I made my final preparations. I packed a suitcase with clothes, toiletries, the few things I'd need. I called my sister Helen in Eugene. "Helen, I'm coming to stay with you for a while. Is that okay?" "Of course." "Maria, what's wrong? You sound strange." "I'll explain when I get there. I'll arrive tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" "Maria, I love you. I'll see you tomorrow." I hung up before she could ask more questions. That night, I slept in my own bed for the last time in a long while, and for the first time in weeks, I slept deeply. Saturday morning, David's wedding day, I woke early, put on comfortable clothes, loaded my car, and at exactly 10 o'clock, while everyone was at the church, I drove to David's house. He and Jennifer had bought a beautiful craftsman-style home in the Pearl District. I'd helped with the down payment, of course. $30,000 that I'd borrowed against my house. I used the spare key I still had, the one David had given me for emergencies, and let myself in. The house was empty, immaculate, ready for them to return as husband and wife. I walked through the living room, the kitchen, the rooms I'd helped furnish with my money and my labor, and I felt nothing. No attachment, no nostalgia. These were just spaces now. I placed the envelope in the center of the kitchen table, where he couldn't possibly miss it, propped it against a vase of fresh flowers, probably arranged by Jennifer's mother. Then I left the key on top of the envelope, and I walked out. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. The house grew smaller, then disappeared. I pointed my car south, toward Eugene, toward Helen, toward whatever came next. And I didn't look back. Helen's house sat on 3 acres of land just outside Eugene, surrounded by Douglas firs and a garden she tended with the same care most people reserve for children. She was 5 years younger than me, had never married, never had kids. She'd always said she was too independent for all that. But I knew the truth. She'd had her heart broken in her 20s and never quite recovered. When I arrived Saturday evening, she was on her porch with a glass of wine, waiting. She took one look at my face and set down the glass. "Inside," she said. Now, we sat at her kitchen table, oak, like mine, but worn smooth by decades of use. And I told her everything, every detail, from David's words to the envelope I'd left on his table. Helen listened without interrupting. When I finished, she reached across the table and gripped my hand so hard it hurt. "Good," she said fiercely. "It's about damn time. You're not going to tell me I overreacted?" "Overreacted?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Maria, I've been watching you disappear piece by piece for years. Every time he called asking for money, every time he canceled plans, every time that woman treated you like hired help. I wanted to say something, but you wouldn't have listened." She was right. I wouldn't have. "What if I'm wrong?" I asked quietly. "What if I've just ruined any chance of reconciliation?" Helen's expression softened. "Maria, listen to me. You didn't ruin anything. He did. Years ago. You just finally stopped pretending otherwise." I stayed in Helen's guest room, small, painted soft yellow, with white curtains that let in morning light. That first night, I turned off my phone. I didn't want to know. Didn't want to see the calls, the messages, the inevitable reaction. Sunday morning, Helen made breakfast. Eggs, toast, coffee. Simple and perfect. We ate on the porch, watching birds flit between trees. "You can stay as long as you need," Helen said. "Forever, if you want." "I don't know what I want yet." "That's okay. You don't have to know." Sunday afternoon, I finally turned on my phone. The screen exploded with notifications. 45 missed calls, all from David. The call log was a timeline of escalation. The first call came at 6:47 p.m. Saturday, probably right after they got home from the reception. Then another at 6:52, then 7:01. Then they started coming rapid fire. 7 calls in 15 minutes, 10 calls in an hour. The last call was at 2:33 a.m. I scrolled through the text messages. 6:51 p.m. "Mom, what is this?" 7:15 p.m. "You need to call me right now." 7:43 p.m. "This isn't funny. Call me." 8:22 p.m. "Jennifer is furious. Do you have any idea what you've done?" 9:38 p.m. "You're being childish. We need to talk about this like adults." 10:47 p.m. "Fine. Don't answer. But you can't just cut me off. I'm your son." 11:55 p.m. "You're ruining everything. You're ruining my wedding day." 1:24 a.m. "I can't believe you're doing this to me." 2:33 a.m. "Mom, please. We need to talk." I read each message twice, analyze the progression, anger, indignation, manipulation, desperation. But nowhere in any of those messages was an apology. Nowhere was any acknowledgement of what he'd said to me. Nowhere was any recognition that he'd hurt me. It was all about him, his wedding, his feelings, his needs. Helen read over my shoulder. "Are you going to respond?" "No." "Good." The messages continued through Sunday. Shorter now, more sporadic, but persistent. "Mom, this is ridiculous. You're overreacting. You always do this. You always make everything about you." That one made me laugh, a short, bitter sound. Helen raised her eyebrows. "He's saying I make everything about me," I said. "That's actually impressive." Monday morning, the calls stopped. The messages stopped. I felt a strange mixture of relief and unease. Had he given up? Accepted it? Or was he planning something else? The answer came Monday evening. Helen and I were in the garden when I heard a car on the gravel drive. My stomach clenched. I knew that engine sound. David's BMW came around the bend and stopped in front of the house. He got out, and even from a distance, I could see he looked terrible. Rumpled suit, unshaven, eyes bloodshot. Helen stood immediately. "Stay here. I'll handle this." "Helen, stay here." She walked toward him with the kind of purposeful stride that made me remember why nobody ever messed with Helen growing up. She might have been smaller than me, but she was fierce. I couldn't hear what they said at first, but I watched. David gestured animatedly. Helen stood perfectly still, arms crossed. Then his voice rose, carrying across the yard. "She's my mother. You can't keep me from— This is my property," Helen said loud and clear. "And if you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police." "You can't be serious. Try me." They stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. Then David looked past Helen, directly at me. I was sitting in a wicker chair on the porch, a glass of iced tea in my hands. Our eyes met across 50 feet of garden, and I saw something in his face I'd never seen before. Fear. Not fear of Helen calling the police. Fear of something much bigger. Fear that he'd miscalculated, that he'd pushed too far, that the safety net he'd taken for granted his entire life had suddenly vanished. I looked at him, my son, my only child, the boy I'd loved more than my own life, and I said nothing. I simply looked at him until he understood that silence was its own kind of answer. He stood there for another moment. Then he turned, got in his car, and drove away. Helen came back to the porch, sat down heavily. "You okay?" "I think so. He'll be back." "Probably." But he wasn't. Not in person anyway. Tuesday, I received an email from Jennifer. "Mrs. Callahan, I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but you've destroyed David's life. He's devastated. He can barely function at work. All because you decided to throw a tantrum over nothing. We were relying on your support for the honeymoon. Now we have to cancel our trip to Italy. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? We had to tell our friends and family that we can't go because David's mother decided to be vindictive. David gave you everything. He gave you a purpose after his father died. He gave you someone to care for. And this is how you repay him? I hope you're happy with yourself, because you've lost your son forever. Jennifer Ashford Callahan." I read it 3 times, then I showed it to Helen. She read it once. "May I respond?" "No, please." "Helen, just let me send one sentence." "One." I hesitated, then nodded. Helen pulled out her phone and typed rapidly. Showed me the screen. "Jennifer, I'm not Mrs. Callahan. I'm Helen, Maria's sister. And I want you to know that your email perfectly explains why Maria made the choice she did. You and David deserve each other." She looked at me. "Can I send it?" I thought about it, then shook my head. "No, don't give her the satisfaction of a response." Helen deleted it. "You're more disciplined than me." The weeks that followed established a strange new rhythm. No more calls from David. No more messages. Just silence. I helped Helen in the garden. I started crocheting again, something I hadn't done since before Thomas died. I joined Helen's book club, a group of women in their 50s and 60s who met every Thursday at the local library. They welcomed me without questions, without judgment. I started sleeping through the night. The knot of anxiety I'd carried in my chest for years began to loosen. I was healing, slowly, painfully, but genuinely. And then, 6 weeks after the wedding, I got a call from Dr. Patterson. "Maria, I heard what happened. I'm so sorry." "Thank you, Dr. Patterson. I'm not calling to pry. I'm calling because I want to offer you your job back. Full-time if you want it. We miss you around here." I'd given notice 2 months before the wedding, thinking I'd want to help David and Jennifer settle into married life, thinking they'd want me around. "I'm in Eugene now," I said. "I know, but the offer stands, if you ever want to come back." After I hung up, Helen asked, "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," but I was beginning to realize something important. I'd spent so much of my life defining myself by my relationship to David that I'd forgotten how to define myself on my own terms. Who was Maria Callahan? Separate from being David's mother. I was starting to find out. 3 months after the wedding, autumn had fully settled into Western Oregon. The trees outside Helen's house blazed gold and crimson. Morning air carried the sharp scent of wood smoke and damp earth. I'd fallen into a routine that felt, for the first time in years, entirely mine. I woke when I wanted. Spent mornings in Helen's garden, pulling weeds and pruning roses. Afternoons were for reading. I'd worked my way through half of Helen's mystery collection. Evenings, Helen and I cooked together, sharing wine and conversation that ranged from trivial to profound. I'd started attending a watercolor class at the community center on Tuesday mornings. I wasn't good, but I enjoyed it. The instructor, a retired art teacher named Patricia, encouraged us to paint from feeling, not from thinking. I'd spent so much of my life thinking, planning, worrying. Painting without thinking was revolutionary. My phone stayed mostly silent now. David had stopped calling after the first month. I'd received 2 more emails from Jennifer, each angrier than the last, each blaming me for various inconveniences in their life. I deleted them without responding. But one Wednesday morning in early November, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Portland area code. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mrs. Callahan?" A woman's voice, professional but tentative, speaking. "This is Diane Chen. I'm a colleague of David's at Ashford Consulting. I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from the company directory. My guard went up immediately. How can I help you? I wanted to reach out because, well, I'm worried about David. He's been different since his wedding. Distracted, making mistakes he never made before. He missed an important client meeting last week. That's not like him. I said nothing. I don't know what happened between you two, Diane continued carefully, and it's not my business. But I wanted you to know that he's struggling, in case that matters to you. Thank you for calling, I said quietly, but I can't help him with this. There was a pause. I understand. I'm sorry for bothering you. After she hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time. Helen found me like that, staring out the window. Who was that? I told her. Helen's jaw tightened. Are you okay? I don't know. Part of me wants to feel satisfaction that he's struggling, but I don't. I just feel sad. That's because you're a good person, Maria, better than he deserves. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't allowed myself to do since leaving Portland. I looked David up online. His LinkedIn profile showed he was still at Ashford Consulting, still listed as senior manager. His Facebook was locked down, but Jennifer's wasn't. Her recent posts were telling. Photos from the wedding, captioned with declarations of eternal love. A picture of their house with the caption, "Home sweet home with my forever person." But as I scrolled back through the months, the posts became less frequent, and the most recent one from 2 days ago was just a quote. Sometimes the people who seem to have it all are fighting battles you know nothing about. I closed the browser. Whatever battles they were fighting, I couldn't fight them for them. I'd spent decades trying to solve David's problems, smooth his path, make his life easier, and it had turned me into someone he could exploit without consequence. Never again. That evening, Helen and I sat on the porch with blankets wrapped around us, watching the sunset behind the trees. She'd made mulled cider, and the smell of cinnamon and cloves reminded me of autumn nights when David was young, when we'd carve pumpkins together and he'd tell me about his day at school. Do you regret it? Helen asked suddenly. Walking away? I considered the question carefully. I regret that it became necessary. I regret that my son became someone I don't recognize. But do I regret protecting myself? No. Good. Helen, can I ask you something? Anything. Why didn't you ever tell me that you saw what was happening? That David was taking advantage? She was quiet for a long moment. Because you weren't ready to hear it. And if I'd pushed, you would have defended him and pulled away from me. Sometimes the only way people can learn a lesson is by living through it themselves. She was right, of course. If Helen had confronted me a year ago, 6 months ago, even a week before that Thursday evening, I would have made excuses. I would have explained all the reasons why David needed my help, why I was obligated to give it, why a good mother never stops sacrificing. It took David's own words, "Your death would be the best gift you could give me," to shatter the illusion I'd been clinging to. November became December. Helen and I decorated her house for Christmas with an enthusiasm I hadn't felt in years. We drove into Eugene and picked out a tree. A small one, just right for her living room. We baked cookies and listened to old jazz records. We watched classic movies and drank hot chocolate spiked with peppermint schnapps. It was the first Christmas in 37 years that I didn't spend worrying about what David wanted, what David needed, whether David would be happy. And I was surprised to discover that I could be happy without him. 2 days before Christmas, a package arrived. No return address, but the postmark was Portland. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a small leather journal, and tucked into the first page, a letter. David's handwriting. I almost didn't read it, almost threw the whole thing away, but Helen put her hand on my arm. Whatever it says, you should know, for closure if nothing else. I unfolded the letter. Mom, I don't know if you'll read this. I wouldn't blame you if you threw it away without opening it. I've spent the last 3 months trying to understand what happened, trying to understand how things got so bad between us. And I keep coming back to that Thursday night, to what I said to you. Jennifer says I should just move on, that you're the one who abandoned me, and I shouldn't feel guilty. But I can't stop thinking about your face when I said those words, about the way you just stood there. So quiet. I want to say I didn't mean it, but that would be a lie. In that moment, I did mean it, and I need to be honest about that if I'm going to be honest about anything. The truth is, I've been angry at you for years. Angry that you were always there, always hovering, always wanting to know everything about my life. Angry that you made me feel guilty every time I tried to establish boundaries. Angry that you sacrificed so much that I could never possibly repay you. Jennifer helped me see how unhealthy our relationship was, how you were too enmeshed in my life, how I needed to break free. But here's what I'm starting to realize now, when it's probably too late. I confused your love with control. I mistook your care for manipulation. I saw every sacrifice you made as a debt that I resented rather than a gift given freely. The company is doing layoffs layoffs after Christmas. My position might not survive. Jennifer and I are fighting constantly. Mostly about money. Mostly about the fact that we had to cancel the honeymoon and scale back on a lot of things we'd planned. She keeps saying we'd be fine if you hadn't abandoned us. But you didn't abandon us, did you? You just stopped enabling us. You stopped letting me treat you like an ATM with a pulse. I've been going through old photos, found one from my 8th birthday. Remember? We couldn't afford a party, so you made a treasure hunt through the house with clues written on index cards. At the end, there was a homemade cake and a baseball glove you'd saved for months to buy. I'm looking at my face in that photo, and I look so happy, so loved. When did I forget how to see that love? I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve a response, but I wanted you to have this journal. I know you used to keep one before Dad died. I found it years ago when I was looking for something in the attic. You wrote about your dreams, your fears, your hopes for me. Maybe it's time you had space to write about your own dreams again. Dreams that don't revolve around me. I'm sorry, Mom, for everything. For taking you for granted. For treating your love like it was infinite and free. For saying something so cruel that I can't take it back. I hope you're happy. I hope you're finding peace. You deserve both. David, I read the letter 3 times. Then I set it down carefully and picked up the journal. It was beautiful. Soft brown leather. Acid-free paper. A ribbon bookmark, expensive. The kind of thing David would have asked me to buy for him a year ago. Helen had been reading over my shoulder. What are you going to do? I don't know. Do you want to respond? I thought about that night, about the pie cooling on the counter, about the way he'd stood there with Jennifer, united in their cruelty, about the months of financial exploitation disguised as family obligation. But I also thought about the little boy who'd crawled into my lap when his father died, and whispered, "Are you going to leave me too?" About the teenager who'd worked so hard to make me proud, about all the moments when he'd been kind, thoughtful, loving. People aren't simple. They're not all good or all bad. David wasn't a villain. He was a flawed man who'd made terrible choices, influenced by someone who brought out his worst impulses, and who'd never learned that love wasn't something he could take for granted. I'm going to think about it, I said finally. Christmas came and went. Helen and I cooked a small feast, exchanged modest gifts, watched the snow begin to fall outside. It was peaceful, simple, good. But David's letter sat on my nightstand, and I found myself reading it every few days, looking for sincerity, looking for manipulation, looking for whatever it was I needed to find to make a decision. New Year's Eve, Helen and I stayed up until midnight with champagne and optimism about the year ahead. At 12:01, my phone buzzed with a text. David. Just 2 words. Happy New Year. I stared at those 2 words for a long time. Then I typed back, slowly, thank you. Same to you. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then, can I call you sometime? Not now, but sometime, when you're ready. I didn't respond immediately. Helen watched me carefully. What does your gut tell you? She asked. That I'm not ready yet, but maybe someday I will be. I typed, not yet, but I'll let you know if that changes. His response came quickly. Okay. I understand. Thank you. January brought cold rain and long, dark evenings. I continued my routines. The garden, the painting class, the book club. Helen and I fell into an easy companionship that felt like the family I'd been missing all along. But something had shifted inside me. David's letter had cracked open something I'd been trying to keep sealed. Not forgiveness. I wasn't there yet. But maybe the possibility of it. Somewhere down the road. I started writing in the journal he'd sent. Small things at first. Observations about the garden. Memories of Thomas. Reflections on the past year. And slowly, tentatively, I began to write about the future. Not a future centered on David, but a future centered on me. What did I want? Who did I want to be? I was 64 years old. I'd spent 37 years as David's mother. But before that, and underneath that, I was Maria, a woman who loved gardens and mystery novels, who could bake a perfect pie, who'd survived crushing grief and rebuilt a life from nothing. That Maria had gotten lost somewhere along the way, but she was still there, and she was stronger than I'd given her credit for. In late January, I got another call from Diane Chen. Mrs. Callahan, I hope you don't mind me calling again. It's all right. David's position was eliminated in the layoffs. I wanted you to know. My stomach clenched. Is he okay? Honestly, I don't know. He cleaned out his desk yesterday. Didn't say much. Jennifer came to help him, and they were arguing in the parking lot. It looked bad. After she hung up, I sat with that information for a long time. Part of me wanted to call him, to ask if he needed anything, to slip back into the familiar role of solving his problems, but I didn't. Because David losing his job wasn't my emergency to fix. He was an adult. He'd made choices, and sometimes choices had consequences that were uncomfortable but necessary for growth. If I swooped in to rescue him now, I'd be teaching him the same lesson I'd taught him his whole life, that his actions didn't have real consequences because Mom would always be there to catch him. It was time for him to catch himself. February brought the first signs of spring. Crocuses pushed through the cold ground in Helen's garden. Days grew incrementally longer, and I made a decision. I called Dr. Patterson. "I'd like to take you up on that job offer, if it's still available." "Maria, of course it is. When can you start?" "Give me 2 weeks to find an apartment and get settled." "Take 3. We'll be here when you're ready." Helen hugged me when I told her, "I'm going to miss you. I'll visit all the time. And you'll visit me. But I think I need to go back, not to my old life, but to build a new one." I found a small apartment in southeast Portland, not far from the medical office. 1 bedroom, hardwood floors, a tiny balcony where I could grow herbs in pots. It was modest, but mine. Entirely mine. On my last night at Helen's, we sat on the porch one final time. "Are you going to reach out to David?" she asked. "I don't know. Maybe. Eventually. On my terms. Whatever you decide, I support you." "I know. Thank you for giving me space to figure this out. That's what sisters are for." I moved back to Portland in early March. Started work the following Monday. The routine was familiar but different. I was coming back as a stronger version of myself, one who knew how to say no, who knew her own worth. 2 weeks after my return, I was walking through the Pearl District on my lunch break when I saw him, David, standing outside a coffee shop, looking at his phone. He'd lost weight, looked tired, but he was standing straight, and there was something in his posture that seemed different. More grounded, maybe, or just more worn down by life. He looked up, saw me, froze. We stood there 20 feet apart on a busy sidewalk with people streaming around us. I could have walked away, pretended I hadn't seen him. It would have been easy, but I didn't. I walked toward him, slowly, deliberately. "Hello, David." "Mom." His voice cracked on the word. "I didn't know you were back in Portland. I moved back a few weeks ago. I'm working at Dr. Patterson's office again." That's good. I'm glad." We stood in awkward silence. Then he said, "I lost my job." "I heard. I'm sorry. Jennifer and I are separated. She moved back to Seattle last month." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. "I got a job at a smaller firm," he continued. "It pays less, but it's good work. Honest work. I'm learning to live within my means." A bitter smile. "Something I should have learned a long time ago." "That's good, David." Another silence. Then he took a breath. "Mom, I know I don't have the right to ask, but could we get coffee sometime? Just to talk." I looked at him, really looked at him, saw the boy he'd been and the man he'd become and the person he might still grow into. "I'm not ready for that yet," I said quietly, "but maybe someday." Disappointment flashed across his face, but he nodded. "I understand. Thank you for even considering it." "David." "Yes?" "I got your letter. And the journal. Thank you." Something in his expression shifted. Relief, maybe. Or hope. "You're welcome." "I meant every word." "I know you did." We stood there for another moment. Then I said, "I need to get back to work." "Of course." "Mom, I really am sorry." "I know." I walked away without looking back. But this time, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a pause. A space where healing might be possible if we both did the work. Spring turned into summer. I settled into my new life. My job, my apartment, my routines. I joined a community garden and grew tomatoes and basil. I took weekend trips to Eugene to visit Helen. I went on dates with a kind widower I met at the farmer's market, though nothing serious came of it. And every few weeks, David would send a text. Nothing demanding, nothing guilt-inducing, just small updates. Started therapy. It's hard, but good. Or, found a cheaper apartment. Starting to get my finances in order. Or simply, thinking of you. Hope you're well. I didn't always respond, but sometimes I did. In August, on what would have been Thomas's 71st birthday, David sent a message. "I went to Dad's grave today. Put flowers there. I told him I was sorry for letting you down, for letting both of you down." I sat on my balcony with that message on my screen for a long time. Then I typed, "He would be proud that you're trying to do better." The response came quickly. "Do you think you ever could be?" I answered honestly, "I don't know yet, but I want to believe it's possible." In September, 6 months after I'd seen him on that sidewalk, David sent another text. "Mom, I don't want to pressure you, but if you're ever ready, I'd really like to talk. Face to face. No expectations, just a conversation." I read it 3 times. Showed it to Helen over the phone. "What does your gut say?" she asked. "That I'm scared, but maybe it's time." "Then do it, but on your terms. In a public place, with clear boundaries." I texted back. Saturday, 2 p.m. The coffee shop on Division. 1 hour. His response, I'll be there. Thank you. Saturday arrived cold and rainy. Typical Oregon autumn weather. I wore comfortable clothes, brought a book in case I needed an excuse to leave early, and arrived 10 minutes late deliberately, setting the terms. David was already there, at a corner table, with 2 cups of coffee. He stood when he saw me. Hi, Mom. Hello, David. We sat. The coffee was still hot. He'd timed it perfectly. Thank you for coming, he said. I'm here, but I need you to understand something. I'm not here to resume our old relationship. I'm here to see if a new one is possible. He nodded. I understand. And I need to say some things. Without interruption. Can you do that? Yes. I took a breath. What you said to me about my death being the best gift I could give you, that broke something in me. Something I don't know if it can be fully repaired, but it also woke me up. Made me see that I'd spent decades loving you at the expense of loving myself. He started to speak, but I held up my hand. I'm not done. I enabled you. I gave and gave until I had nothing left, and I called that love. But real love requires boundaries. It requires reciprocity. It requires that both people maintain their dignity. Tears were running down his face now, but I continued. I don't know if we can rebuild a relationship. I don't know if I can ever trust you the way I once did, but I'm willing to try, slowly, carefully, with boundaries that I will enforce. Okay, he whispered. Your turn. He wiped his eyes, took a shaky breath. I've been in therapy for 6 months, working through a lot of things, and I've come to understand that I treated you terribly. Not just that one night, but for years. I took everything you gave and acted like I was entitled to it. He paused, collecting himself. Jennifer and I, we brought out the worst in each other. She came from money and couldn't understand why I had this mother who worked 2 jobs and wore old clothes and drove an old car. She saw you as an embarrassment, and I let her. I even started seeing you that way too. Why? I asked quietly. Because it was easier than being grateful. Because gratitude felt like obligation, and obligation felt like a burden, and Jennifer gave me permission to see it that way. He looked down at his coffee. Losing my job, losing Jennifer, losing you, it forced me to look at who I'd become. And I didn't like what I saw, so I've been working on changing. Not for you, for myself, because I need to be someone I can respect. What does that look like? I asked. It looks like living in a studio apartment and cooking my own meals. Like taking the bus because I can't afford a car payment. Like saying no to things I can't afford instead of expecting someone else to bail me out. Like actually showing up for the few friends who stuck around. He met my eyes. It looks like understanding that you didn't owe me anything, that everything you gave was a gift, and I squandered it. We sat in silence for a moment. Then I said, I appreciate you saying that. Does it change anything? I don't know yet, but it's a start. We talked for another 45 minutes. Not about the past, but about the present. He told me about his new job, his therapy, his goals. I told him about my apartment, my garden, my life with Helen. When the hour was up, I stood. I need to go. Can we do this again? Maybe. In a month or so. Okay. He stood too. Hesitated. Can I hug you? I hesitated too. Then nodded. The hug was brief, tentative. Nothing like the easy affection we'd once shared. But it was something. As I walked to my car, I felt something unfamiliar. Not happiness exactly. Not forgiveness, but maybe the beginning of peace. It's been 14 months since that Thursday evening, since the pie, the words, the envelope. David and I meet once a month for coffee, sometimes twice. We talk about safe things mostly. Work, books, the weather. We're rebuilding trust, brick by brick, and it's slow, painstaking work. He's never asked me for money. Not once. When his car broke down, he took the bus until he could afford repairs. When his apartment lease ended, he found a place he could afford on his own. He's dating someone new. Her name is Rachel. She's a teacher, and she comes from a family not unlike the one I grew up in. When he talks about her, his voice is different, warmer, more genuine. She knows everything that happened between us. David told her on their 3rd date. I wanted her to know who I was, he explained, the worst of me, so she could decide if I was worth the risk. Last month, he asked if Rachel could join us for coffee. I said yes. She was kind, thoughtful, asked me questions about myself, and actually listened to the answers. After she left to use the restroom, David looked at me hopefully. What do you think? I think she's good for you, I said honestly. I think she sees you clearly. Both the person you were and the person you're becoming. His eyes filled with tears. Thank you. I still live in my apartment. Still work at Dr. Patterson's office. Still visit Helen regularly. Still maintain the life I've built that centers on me, not on anyone else. I've started painting more seriously, taking classes at the community college. I'm not particularly talented, but I enjoy it. Last week, I sold a small landscape at a local art fair. The woman who bought it said it reminded her of hope. I nearly cried. Yesterday was my 65th birthday. Helen drove up from Eugene. David came over with Rachel. They brought flowers and a cake. Apple cinnamon, made from scratch. Rachel's recipe, David said quickly. But I helped. We sat on my small balcony, eating cake and watching the sun set over Portland. It was simple, imperfect, real. As they were leaving, David handed me a card. Don't open it now, he said. Later, when you're alone. After they left, I opened it. Inside was a check for $40,000. And a note. Mom, this doesn't come close to repaying what I owe you. Not financially, and certainly not emotionally, but it's a start. I've been saving since I started my new job. Living cheaply, making different choices. Please take this, not because you need it, but because I need to give it. Because I need to show you, in concrete terms, that I understand the value of what you gave me. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like. I love you, David. I sat on my couch, holding that check, and I cried. Not tears of sadness, tears of something more complicated. Relief, maybe. Or vindication. Or just the simple acknowledgement that sometimes people can change. I deposited the check the next day, put half in savings, donated a quarter to a women's shelter, and used the rest to book a trip to Italy. The honeymoon David and Jennifer had to cancel. Helen is coming with me. We leave in October. This morning, I was tending my balcony garden when my phone rang. David. Hi, Mom. Hello, sweetheart. A pause. Then, I was wondering, Rachel and I are having dinner at our place on Sunday. Nothing fancy. Just spaghetti and salad. Would you like to come? I thought about it. Thought about where we'd been and where we might be going. Thought about the long road we'd traveled and how much further we still had to go. I'd like that, I said. After we hung up, I looked at my reflection in the balcony window. 65 years old. Gray hair that I'd stopped coloring, lines around my eyes from years of worry and more recently, from laughter. A woman who'd lost herself and found herself again. I thought about that woman 2 years ago. The one who worked herself to exhaustion and called it love. The one who gave everything and asked for nothing. The one who believed that being a good mother meant disappearing so her child could shine. She was gone now. In her place was someone stronger. Someone who understood that love without boundaries isn't love at all. Someone who'd learned that the greatest gift you can give someone is the truth. Even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. My phone buzzed with a text from Helen. Excited for Italy? I typed back. More than I can say. Another text. Proud of you, sis. I smiled. Typed. Proud of me, too. And I meant it, because this story doesn't have a tidy ending. David and I will probably never have the relationship we once did, and that's okay. Some things, once broken, can be repaired, but never fully restored. The cracks remain visible, a reminder of what was lost. But cracks also let light in. I'm learning to live in that light. Learning to be Maria, not just Mom. Learning that it's never too late to choose yourself. The pie I made that Thursday night, the one that cooled on my kitchen counter while my world fell apart, I never did get to taste it, but I've made others since. And I've learned something important about pies and about life. Sometimes you have to let things cool before you can see them clearly. Sometimes the sweetest things require bitter ingredients. And sometimes the best gift you can give, to yourself, to the people you love, is the willingness to walk away when staying would cost you your soul. I'm 65 years old. I have a job I enjoy, a sister I adore, a garden that thrives, and a son who's learning what it means to love without taking. I have my dignity, I have my peace, and I have a trip to Italy planned for October. That Thursday evening, standing in my kitchen with my heart breaking, I couldn't have imagined any of this. Couldn't have imagined that the worst moment of my life would be the beginning of the best chapter. But here I am, still standing, still growing, still learning, still Maria. And that, it turns out, is enough.